Hello, I'm Matt Galloway, and this is The Current Podcast.
I know why Chinese cars aren't sold in America. It's because they would dominate.
Electric vehicles from China are coming to Canada, and car reviewers like the journalist Kevin Williams, who've had the chance to drive Chinese EVs, love them.
It's kind of crazy being in the front seat of this thing. People are very obsessed with this car. It's only $10,000 US, yet it's China's best-selling car. And having driven it around Suzhou for about an hour now, I absolutely understand why. There are so many things in here that I'm just obsessed with. It rides nice, it handles nice for what it is, and it's actually very sophisticated for being such a cheap car. I see why BYD is killing the game here in China.
It's not just car reviewers who are excited. The promise of less expensive EVs is also a draw for people we spoke to on the streets of Vancouver.
I think when you look at electric vehicles, China makes sense. A market where there's more competition is going to be cheaper and does appeal to me.
Well, actually, I have an electric vehicle. I don't know about politics, but I think getting more option, right? Given the situation where we are right now, I was not a big fan of China myself, but am I now a big fan of U.S.? I don't know. So now I think it's just about what is the best deal, what is the business, right, that makes sense.
This new deal between Canada and China will open the Canadian market to 49,000 Chinese EVs a year at a tariff of 6.1% instead of 100%. That deal has been controversial. Donald Trump is threatening a 100% tariff on Canadian goods over any deal struck with China. The Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, called on Canadians to boycott the vehicles because he sees them as another nail in the coffin for Canada's auto industry. Although after a meeting with the Prime Minister yesterday, he seems to have toned down his opposition. But beyond the politics, what exactly does this deal mean for consumers? Rachel Doran is Executive Director of Clean Energy Canada. It is a think tank based at Simon Fraser University, and she's with me in our Toronto studio. Good morning.
Good morning, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you back. You have said that Canada is in the embarrassing position of being potentially the only country that has sold fewer EVs, has seen a decline in EV sales as of last year. So is this deal going to be good news for Canadians?
We've welcomed this deal. I would say at the start, we're talking 49,000 cars. This isn't by itself going to completely change the game, but it is a really exciting step. And as you noted at the outset, we've actually been behind the U.S. in sales last year, even though we're hearing all these news out of the U.S. And globally, we've gotten to 1 in 4 cars being sold that are electric. And as you said in some of the clips at the beginning, this is due to not only people who are picking these up because of emissions, but because of the affordability of going electric over time, because the R&D and technology is moving in this direction for just these more efficient vehicles. So I think really exciting to see any steps to try to allow Canadian consumers who want to get behind the wheel of an electric vehicle to do so, but definitely to be complemented by other measures.
Do we know, we don't know the details, but do we know what brands and what kinds of cars we would be getting? What is going to be part of that 49,000 vehicles?
So I think there's speculation at the moment, and the government has said they're going to reveal some of the conditions around this going forward, and they were anticipating an auto strategy coming out in February. But I think there's been some speculation that car makers like Tesla, like Volvo, were making cars in China prior to this 100% tariff, and that it might be easy in early years to kind of shift production lines back to send some of those cars to Canada. Those cars like BYD, there's a Chinese automaker called Chery that's indicated some interest in coming into the Canadian market. I think that's a bit more speculative, but one of the really exciting parts of the deal was Ottawa saying by 2030, what they want is 50% of this rising quota to be cars under $35,000. And that's a segment of the market that's just not being served in Canada today. When we looked in the fall, there was actually only one model in Canada available under $40,000, whereas in a place like the European Union, they have 21 models under that price point. So really starting to drive some cars into the market that are going to be attractive to people whose budget may be lower, but are really excited about going electric.
You have said, these are your words, that Canada has inadvertently broken its EV market. How did we do that?
Well, I think there were a sequence of decisions over the past year. So there was both a kind of pause in the rebates that existed at the federal and the BC level, and BC was really helping drive some of our overall Canadian market. But it wasn't just that the rebates stopped. They stopped unexpectedly, and government officials kept saying, well, they might be coming back. So if you were looking at an EV, maybe you were saying, well, I'm going to wait and see, if there's going to be some financial assistance in the future.
It's going to cost you less down the line, maybe.
Yeah. And the regulation called the EV Sales Availability Standard has been delayed a year. That policy is maybe not well known, but actually has the effect in jurisdictions where it's in place of really drawing more models into the country, because it requires automakers to make a certain number of cars available for sale. And if they have to, they want to sell them. So they want to start bringing in models that are going to appeal to the consumer and that will go off the lots. So that delay was another decision. And then this Chinese EV decision, again, we're really one of the only countries who followed the U.S. at that 100% mark. Places, again, like the European Union, like Mexico, have put tariffs that are lower and in some case flexible based on how much China has kind of invested in the automakers.
In those jurisdictions, you will see those Chinese EVs. I mean, Mexico and through Europe.
Exactly. And in somewhere like the European Union, again, in this same study, we looked, and out of those 21 cars, 7 of them were Chinese automakers, but the rest were coming from South Korea, European automakers, and that's where I think you start getting into that, like, competition is good. There's a reason why we think, an open market drives down prices. As soon as you start seeing some competition in these lower price brackets, historically, we've seen other automakers need to lower their prices, introduce models to compete in that area. So that's where I think this 49,000 can be exciting twofold for Canada. It can create some competition and less of a walled-off car market. And, potentially in the longer run, we may be looking also, and the Prime Minister has alluded to this, at hopefully some investment from Chinese automakers in Canada as well.
We've heard from those folks on the streets of Vancouver talking about this deal and what it might mean to them. What do we know about how much demand there actually is in this country for electric vehicles?
So we did a study about a year ago looking at kind of demand in Canada. And I think one of the things that remained true is there's still a high proportion of people who are interested in an electric vehicle for their next car. So about 50% overall, and that went up in things like younger demographics. So 70% if you're kind of in your 30s, 70% if you actually know someone who owns an electric vehicle. So if you have some personal experience with this, and again, in regions like the greater Vancouver area where there's a lot more EVs on the road, again, that percentage went up. So there's definitely people out there saying, I'd like to have one of these cars. And a lot of them are saying maybe but, though. And the affordability is one of the first things that comes up as a barrier. And people just saying, I'm know that I'm going to save money driving an EV over time. There's an affordability crisis. I'd like to be able to do that, but I just can't really go above a certain price point for that upfront cost. So that's why these measures that drive down that upfront cost, I think, are really going to help meet that untapped demand here in Canada.
I mean, there has been fierce pushback to this from Ontario, and there was this pizza summit yesterday between the Premier and the Prime Minister in which they seemed to smooth things over a little bit. But one of the things that Doug Ford is quite upset about is this EV mandate, which would mean that 60% of the new vehicles sold in Canada by 2030 would be electric, 100% by 2035. He wants that scrapped. And it's unclear whether the Prime Minister has left the door open to that or not. If that mandate is scrapped, what does that mean for the national uptake for this technology?
So we've been saying for the last year, you need a package of policies that's going to both balance the interests of the automakers and our, future auto sector and the interests of consumers. And so this kind of tariff decision, as I said, I think is one step in the right direction, both on affordability but also on competitiveness. But that broader package includes the EV availability standard. And again, that policy isn't really designed for automakers. Automakers would prefer not to be regulated. It's, in many ways going to be beneficial to consumers. And in jurisdictions that have this kind of policy, it's been proven to bring down the price point of cars, again, by bringing more models into the market and incentivizing automakers to make them for sale. So we don't know the details yet of whether the policy will be maintained or whether the overall trajectory to 2035 may be lowered. But we think it is a really important part of that broader package that could be offered to really help Canadians access EVs. And the last component of that package could be the reintroduction of a rebate. Again, it could have a phase-out period. It doesn't need to last forever, but just with some predictability around where the financial incentives are going to go.
Who's going to win out, do you think, on this? I mean, consumers want to spend less money, But you have, and it's not just the people who are working in the auto sector. To your point, the auto companies themselves are fighting against a mandate, saying we don't want to be told what to do. We'll sell the cars that we'll sell, and people will buy what they want to buy. Who's going to win out on this, do you think? Will it be the consumer, or will it be those who are lobbying against those changes? Well,
I'm hopeful that the package that we'll see coming in February will have a balanced approach. And I think, we've suggested that this can be one part of the broader policy package. And maybe it's important also to consider, people often issues will get raised around electric vehicles, like, will there be enough charging? Again, what this standard actually does is create a level of predictability around how many EVs are going to be on the road. It creates certainty for investment in charging. It creates certainty for the utilities to know how much electricity will be required. So there's lots of good reasons why this needs to be maintained. And I think we've just been suggesting often industry voices in this point can be easily recognized, but maybe the better—
You're being very polite in how you're saying that.
Can be. It's important for organizations like ours, I think, to really talk about the interests of the everyday consumer to be balanced here, but also, what is our car market going to look like in 10 years? So, I think we've been talking about how if you look back to when Japanese cars came into the Canadian market in the 1980s, clearly it may not be interesting to have competition, and to oversimplify, say, if you are a kid in a class who's used to being the best at math or the best at swimming, if somebody comes in and who's constantly beating you by 2 questions, are you going to like that? Maybe not. But are you going to study harder? Are you going to swim faster? So, competition in this circumstance with the Japanese automakers ended up driving up the efficiency of the cars being made here today and driving prices down, emissions down. So, when we look at where the car market globally is going, it is towards electric. We want to be able to compete, and we do want some of that technology and skills transfer to come here to Canada for Canadian workers. So whether that's through direct Chinese investment or just securing our critical minerals and our value add into these global supply chains, I'm hoping Ottawa, when they're making their eventual auto policy, is considering that broad triangle of all of the interests really at stake here.
Rachel, thank you very much for this.
Thank you, Matt.
Rachel Doran is Executive Director of Clean Energy Canada. It is a think tank based out of Simon Fraser University. Julian Karagesian is a former special advisor on international trade and finance to the Department of Finance. He's a visiting lecturer on economics at McGill University. Julian, good morning to you.
Good morning, Matt.
You wrote in Maclean's magazine, these are your words, "We have more to gain from this deal than we have to lose. What does Canada stand to gain from bringing Chinese electric vehicles into our country?"
Well, there's 2 parts to that. One thing that we have to gain, and I think we've gained it now, is that we've got tariff relief for our Western farmers and Eastern fisheries, because there were retaliatory tariffs from China on those sectors and products because of our 100% surtax, which we put in place on the same day that the Biden administration, let's say, asked us to, or we did it in unison. And so that's one aspect that's unrelated to the automobile industry, only indirectly related, but also what we're doing is bringing in, it's a symbolic number of cars, but it's going to be a powerful symbol once people see these cars and see the prices and the different models. And that's just from China. There are other countries. Right. I think, they're going to be very popular, particularly the cost. And so, and we're talking right now in the first instance of only 2.5% of total vehicle sales and about 20%, about 18% of total EV sales in Canada.
Could I just briefly ask you about cost? We were speaking with Rachel about this. Car ownership is expensive. It is generally the second largest expense that households have beyond shelter. How big of a difference do you think this will make if people have the access to a cheaper car?
Well, I think it'll make a significant difference. As you said, for most households, probably 75 to 85%, my back of the envelope calculation. It's the second largest expense for a owner. Let's say for a car owner, let's say for 2/3 of the population minimum. And so countries like China with 57 passenger EV makers and also India, they can put a car on the road in their own countries for about, well, in India for $8,000. And in China, they can put a car on the road for about $12,000, $13,000, $14,000. I'm talking Canadian. And so they could probably get those cars here for well under $35,000. For many people, let's say, for sake of argument, let's say they can get them here for $25,000, right. Some of the models, that'll make a huge difference for people. Because if you go out now and look for a car, it's minimum $50,000, pretty much anywhere you go.
And so Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, and people in the auto sector in his province have hit the emergency signal, saying that this is going to create carnage within that sector that is already precarious. Have a listen to what Flavio Volpe, the president of the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association, said about this deal.
Sure. We gave up 3% of the market here on the promise perhaps that the Chinese may invest here, reviewable over 3 years. Today's a good day for those agricultural sectors. We've restored some of their market access to $3 billion worth of exports, but those 49,000 cars are worth about $2 or $3 billion here. So we paid a price here. We're working together with the government on other measures. We have to remain vigilant that this doesn't become a permanent foothold that expands through the market like it did in Europe and put all those local manufacturers on the back foot.
Is this, not to be dramatic, but is this another nail in the coffin of an industry that, as I said, is in a precarious state already?
I don't think it's another nail in the coffin. It doesn't have to be. It could be if we're talking about just allowing a flood of imports to come in, because most households, if we, let's say we get past these geopolitical tensions and we've made some progress, a lot of households would choose these very futuristic looking, low priced automobiles from China and other locations, particularly from China. But we're not doing that. We control how many EVs we let in. It's going to rise from 49,000 to 70,000. But if you look at what Chinese EV makers have done in other countries, Chery is producing in Spain. They took over a German automotive factory and they started producing vehicles, EVs. I think they're producing 284,000 a year outside of Barcelona in unison, like as part of a consortium that includes, I believe, the Barcelona government. If you look at what Volkswagen and Volvo are doing, their new business models, they're making key parts in China. They're sourcing them. But everything else is being done in Germany and Sweden, respectively. And they have the labor unions on board there. So I think Mr. Volpe is right in the first instance that if we're just talking about imports and no investment in production, that would be a last nail in the coffin. But local to local production is now a significant feature of Chinese EV makers. They're producing in many, many countries around the world.
Just briefly, we're running short of time, but let me ask you quickly just about one of the concerns that some people have, and this is raised by the Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford. He said that these could be spy cars. You have Pierre Poilievre, leader of the Conservative Party, said that you have to worry about, roving surveillance operations. Should we be worried about technology here?
Spyware is not my expertise, but I don't think so. I don't think it's a legitimate concern. But let's say I'm completely wrong. Then we have the ability to take Chinese software out of those vehicles and replace it. Actually, we have Canadian technology. BlackBerry now has some kind of version of CarPlay where we could put BlackBerry technology, Canadian code into the cars if espionage through vehicles is a legitimate concern. But 80% of iPhones are made in China and they have a space station and God knows what else. And so wouldn't those things be their first instruments of spying rather than vehicles? But I don't know anything about spyware. I just know that we can take out their software platforms and put Canadian ones in, which would be good for Ottawa and good for Kitchener-Waterloo, where I believe they're going to be made.
We just have a minute or so left. How does this deal, do you think, fit in with the larger conversation about moving away from the United States and diversifying trade partners? Is this a key part of that?
I think it's a key part. It's a symbolic part because we're talking about a small number of vehicles, but our economic model, Matt, is to sell a lot of stuff to the giant neighbor next door. This model is under attack by the Trump administration in the longer term context of thickening borders with the United States. And for our prosperity, and you could say for our national security, which must include prosperity. So for our long-term prosperity, we have to seek out other markets. China is the second largest largest economy in the world by some measures and the largest by other measures. And I say next stop for Mr. Carney's probably India and other gigantic populations, Nigeria, Indonesia, Brazil, Mexico. We need to do this. 3 out of every 4 people in this world live in the global south, and 60% of the world's economy is going to be there in a couple of years. And it's almost 60% right now. So we need to engage more broadly. Having said that, the United States is always going to be our largest trading partner.
Julian, good to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Matt.
Julian Karagesian is a former special advisor on international trade and finance to the Department of Finance. He's a visiting lecturer of economics at McGill University. You've been listening to The Current Podcast. My name is Matt Galloway. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you soon.